If you are new to EOS or curious about EOS, you're not going to want to miss this one. It will be a panel, and we will basically have an on-the-surface sort of discussion of the main features of EOS. So to host this panel, please welcome on stage Chief Marketing Officer for BitSpace, Matthew Bryce. Give him a hand.
Thank you. Let's go. All right. So my name is Matthew Bryce. I'm Chief Marketing Officer for BitSpace and BitGate. Today, we're sitting with 3 key members of the EOS ecosystem, and we hope to give some insight as to what it means to have a blockchain, which is the 3rd generation blockchain, that combines governance, community, and development in the same space. So if you guys would like to go around and do the intros.
Hey everyone, my name is Kevin Rose. I'm co-founder and head of community of EOS New York. We're a top 21 block producer on EOS.
Hi everybody, I'm David Packham. I'm the head of strategy for EOS42, which is also a block producer on the mainnet.
Hello everybody, my name is Yves, and I'm co-founder and CEO of EOS Nation, and we are a standby block producer on EOS.
Nice. So let's say that I know nothing about blockchain, and the audience in here don't know what EOS is. In a nutshell and simplified, what is EOS?
I can start. So EOS is just like any other blockchain. I mean, it's distributed ledger technology, but where EOS differs is in terms of the technology that it uses and the protocol that's at the base layer. And so EOS uses delegated proof of stake. And so instead of having miners in EOS, you have block producers, just like us 3 up here. And that has some significant advantages to the network. So it reduces the cost to the network. There are no mining fees. The fees are free on EOS. They're incredibly fast, and so we're looking at 0.5 millisecond transaction time. And voters are incentivized to stake their tokens into entities that they believe create value, and those would be the block producers.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think a core component that differentiates delegated proof of stake in the EOS network from some of the earlier blockchains is that ability to scale, and that comes about by it no longer being a competition to produce blocks and that raw hash power that you see in the mining pools and the energy consumption concerns that go with that, and the scaling issues and challenges that come with that. You also have, therefore, virtuous cycle of cooperation and competition between the block producers, and that's what we're seeing really in the network now. As it's since launch, all of the block producers are constantly working to add as much value as they can. So it's quite different from that point of view, and it adds a whole level of additional potential for sorts of applications that you can see on a network with scalability like this. So whereas you're potentially limited by the sorts of things, for example, you could see on Ethereum, anything very high transaction volume is not particularly viable right now. We're already seeing a lot of applications and businesses deploying that have very high transaction volumes.
And just to touch on what he just said with a 50,000-foot view, at the most basic definition, EOS is a decentralized application development platform that utilizes C++ that compiles into WebAssembly. It sacrifices hyper-decentralization to a reduced number of validating nodes of 21, which are elected by the stakeholders of the network. And in this way, it can achieve a higher throughput so that end-user applications can be used in real time, rather than you having to either pay fees or to wait for a long time for transaction confirmations.
Nice. People hear a lot in the news about block producers, but no one really knows what you guys get up to. So the average day of a BP and what you guys do.
Great. Okay. So the first thing, there is no such thing as an average day. But being a block producer is fantastic. Personally, as a fulfilling thing, just a reason to get up in the morning. But at the most basic level, a block producer is a constantly campaigning, hyper-accountable technology provider. So every 126 seconds, the votes for block producers on the network are retallied. So our job security is about 2 minutes long. And that keeps us on our toes all day, whether we're awake or not. But we're hired to provide the infrastructure upon which the ledger is distributed, and we provide resources, computing power, networking bandwidth, and RAM, which is storage, for everybody to develop on. But besides just the basic infrastructure provisions, there is also the need to campaign, so you need to distinguish yourself from the block producer next to you. And so many block producers will come up with creative ways to take the rewards that they receive for the technical services they provide to the network and reinvest it into developer tooling or hosting conferences or anything that would further advance the education within the ecosystem, spreading knowledge about EOS, making it easier to be a developer or a token holder and the like. Really, it's only limited to how creative the block producer can be.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of it. I mean, really, the remit, therefore, of a block producer from beyond their core job of producing blocks and network security is to maximize, I think, value add for the token holders in whatever that shape or form that may be. And that's very much open to interpretation from block producer to block producer and candidate and standby and so forth. So what we're seeing is a huge variety of different ideas and creativity between them to effectively outcompete one another and say to anybody who has a stake and owns tokens in the network, these are the reasons you should vote for me, and these are the reasons I should be one of the representatives who run the network. So it's fascinating to already see that cycle of competition, and we're seeing the first rounds of really quite high performance software releases. We've just seen, for example, yesterday, one of the block producers has come up with an initiative to actually certify block producers to make them carbon neutral, so that because EOS uses a protocol that is very efficient, we can actually offset and make it the first carbon neutral blockchain, which is a great initiative by them. It's actually, I think, another example there of a BP adding value in a way that's harder to quantify directly, but it sort of shows how the whole system has been working. So I personally find it very interesting, but the other side of things relating to BPs that we haven't really touched on is there's a whole side to do with the governance layer and politics and thought leadership, which Kevin kind of sidestepped because it's so complicated and he's so involved in. But nonetheless, that's all out there as well, and it's another aspect that means that the job never really ceases to change from day to day. And the final aspect that we are also quite involved with on our own level is relating to incubation services and venture capital investments. So we've placed an investment in one EOS project that's about to deploy on the mainnet. Other block producers are similarly doing that kind of thing to add and ignite the EOS economy.
Sorry, I stole. I've been trying to think of a way to concisely distill into words the culture and its root cause of block producers and token holders. And I think I may have stumbled onto one particular reason. I'm sure it's far more complicated. But there is this weird collaboration amongst block producers. Is that what you're going to say? I'm sorry. We are technically all competing. There are 21 producer positions, but paid positions actually extend out to like 80 or so. So that there are a lot of basically failovers. If a producer were to go down for whatever reason, there's someone to take their place, and they're paid with that infrastructure. But the interesting thing here is that for every token, right, we understand that you vote with your stake, you vote with your tokens, but you don't vote for one producer. Right? If you look at proof of work, there's one group, there's one mining outfit that's going to achieve that next block, and it's a race, and it's a cutthroat race. But there is a producer schedule in EOS, right? And so nobody's racing for the block, but we are racing for votes. So the token can actually vote for 30 producers, not just one. So what that simple mechanic actually makes it so that David or Yves' success does not necessarily mean my failure. So we are able to collaborate knowing that there's room. A token holder can apply their voter discretion across a swath of different producers with different goals and different political affiliations, or however they discern what they would like to vote for and what they wouldn't. And I think that that ability to vote for more than one has allowed this collaborative climate to grow. It's a fascinating thing.
So that's what I wanted to touch upon. It's about, thank you, Kevin. It's about that competitive collaboration, I think is how I define that. It's that spirit of delegated proof of stake and what it's enabled in the EOS ecosystem. Like Kevin mentioned, people are constantly competing for votes, but at the same time, because of the way that the system's designed, we don't necessarily take away from one another. And so we're effectively all competitors, but we also all work on similar projects. And some projects are just so large to undertake with just one single block producer or one single dev shop. And so you combine resources in order to provide content value creation for the network, right? And if so the referendum would be one of them. So because like David touched upon, there's a system of governance as well in EOS. Kevin mentioned that, for example, you can choose right now for up to 30 block producers with each of your tokens, but that could effectively be changed at some point in the future if people wanted to. We could always go back in the source code and change that to 50 block producers or lower it down to 10 block producers. We could change that number with no hard fork. That's the idea, right? With no forking. And so that governance portion, that layer that's added onto EOS, makes it so that we can adapt and we can be flexible. And we've already seen that in action in EOS in the last 6 months since launch. We've already made so many upgrades to the chain. And what it results for at the end user level is that the end user doesn't have to choose whether or not they want to side with one chain or another, because there's no such thing in EOS. EOS can continuously adapt. And we've seen on that spirit of competitive collaboration as well, in terms of do BPs move in and out of the top 21, there are only 5 block producers that from the very beginning have been in the top 21. Actually, both of you are, I think, from the very beginning have been in the top 21. But there are other block producers that have been in and out. We've been in and out at a given point in time. So it's not static. It does move. And the way that it's designed, it incentivizes people that are not in the top 21, that are still getting rewarded, to be able to continue and fight for those votes by creating content, applications, doing some events, or trying to reach out to the community to try and go up in position, so that that competition continuously is built in. And what it does is EOS evolves really, really quickly.
So there's some definitions that are floating around. What is the difference between EOS and EOS.io?
EOS.io is simply a software. So the software itself is an open source software that was developed by Block One, and it's a software that anybody can use. So anybody can take the software itself, modify either the technical parameters that they'd like to change, or the governance layer that they'd like to change, and do something with it. And we've already seen that happen. EOS, or EOS mainnet, I guess, would be the network right now that was launched, where all the block producers and all of the community are kind of behind. Do you want to add something?
I mean, I think the only other thing to add on that is EOS itself, therefore, is the one that has the EOS token, as we know it, and every other version of the networks that we're going to start seeing will have a different token name. But other than that, yeah, that's.
So yeah, governance. Is this good or bad for a blockchain? There's a lot of businesses out here that have heard about EOS, but of course they hear governance, and yeah, go for it, Kev.
So governance is the newest hot topic, right? And at the most basic layer, I think governance is just a means to make collective decisions. So right now, the consensus protocols that are running on whatever chain, that is a method of governance. But there are ways to apply layers on top of it to make it less messy. So delegated proof of stake already is a method to make collective decisions. 15 out of 21 block producers agree to do something, it is done. 51% of the hash power on a proof of work network agree to do something, it is done. That is a way to do it. Now, everything else above that is kind of what we're debating about. And the most controversial aspect of it on EOS is a layer of dispute resolution, which is very necessary when it comes to conducting business. Sometimes transactions don't always go the way that you think they would. And that's something that we're still trying to figure out. I would say that it gets a lot more in depth than there. And happy to talk about it after, but maybe not right now.
Yeah, no, I think rather than going into the detail of that, I think what's most interesting is that we're seeing a giant global debate that's been happening ever since the mainnet launch on this. There's slightly differing visions around how dispute resolution at that additional layer that Kevin touched upon, and how that actually works in the long term. And what we're really going to see, therefore, is that the project that Yves been partly leading on this, which is a referendum tool, will enable actually the community, all the token holders with a vested stake in the network, to actually express their view and ratify what vision they actually see for this.
Yeah, so that referendum is on-chain, right? So it's your voice that's formally on-chain, so it's immutable, and you're able to determine kind of, and vote with stake, right? So it's one token, one vote. I think at the base layer, where or if you take a look at it from a very high-level point of view, this governance is really I think the ultimate goal is to provide transactional confidence and transactional certainty for token holders, and to facilitate businesses coming on to EOS. So just to touch a little bit about the previous question, EOS versus EOS.io, EOS effectively is just software. It's like it's open source software. So think of it as Unix or as Linux. It's open source, and people can build on top of it. So they can build applications on top of it and then utilize that software. And so that governance is just another layer on top of that to be able to help users navigate through the blockchain space.
People hear the word dApps, decentralized applications. Can you tell us what they are and why people should be paying attention to?
So dApps, as we know them, primarily, therefore, they have some sort of component that is on-chain, on a blockchain itself, and that's the decentralized aspect. Now, actually, in practical terms, there's been a move towards almost trying to put too many things on a blockchain, and that can be quite expensive, particularly any elements around data and that utilize things like RAM, which are expensive components. So there are various examples that have already been deployed and built, for example, on the EOS mainnet. They utilize a smart contract, and it will have a series of hard-coded rules that enable you to effectively carry out series of actions whereby you have that degree of certainty that comes with it being on-chain. So that really is the primary thing that tends to be the differentiator for me. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think one important thing, well, two important things, that introduces scarcity and immutability to, especially when it comes to distributing a token that provides a specific utility as it relates back to the application. And why that's so exciting is because in many ways you can take a lot of the systems that we have, a lot of the applications that we have are kind of lopsided, they're a little broken. The incentives aren't necessarily aligned between all the parties involved. And that is especially true for the value creators in many of these ecosystems. So Steemit is a fantastic example where the value creator is at the center of the ecosystem. If you are creating the value on the network, you are being rewarded for it. And a decentralized application can do that in a number of creative ways. So that, for me, that's what's most exciting about it.
To add to that as well, I think, so if we look at kind of Internet 2.0, where we are right now, where all of the security is in the protocol layer, right? Sorry, a lot of the security is in the application layer, and then the protocol layer is very, very small. With EOS, that protocol layer is effectively expanded because most of that security is built within that blockchain and within the software and the infrastructure and the way that the protocol is run. And then the applications that build on top of it no longer really have to worry about that specific portion of security. So that it enables a lot of people to simply focus on the content and not have to worry about the infrastructure that's at the base layer. it was somebody that was talking about earlier in terms of how much cybersecurity hacks there are out there. You're effectively, in a way, outsourcing that security, so you're able to focus on the content itself, the user experience, and what you want to provide, and less focus on, okay, how am I going to make sure that this is safe?
So the EOS community, as we saw yesterday, is growing. It's big. It's global. How do you allow token holders to communicate between the East and the West and make sure that everyone is on a similar level?
Yeah. So that's always a challenge. I've been in the blockchain space now I started in 2010, so 8 years ago, and I've seen over a period of time, and regardless of this, in my previous life as well, I've lived in Asia, and so I know that there's always challenges between cultural barriers, language barriers. And we've seen that in other blockchain projects where at a certain point of time, the effort and the work required to keep a relationship going is very difficult. Now just think of your own personal relationships, right? It never ends. You need to keep working at it. And EOS is no different. Because we have block producers from around the world and we have communities around the world, there's that constant communication that is required, so that everybody, and again, because we have a governed layer, there's that constant communication that's required. And a big part of my role anyways, and my job and kind of what I'm passionate about is really to keep building those bridges and to keep, and to ensure as much as possible that the community that is such a strong asset of EOS remains intact and unified, so that when we do have to make decisions, and when we do upgrade the chain, and when we do have to go forward and upgrade, that everybody's aware of what they're doing, and that we might not always agree, but we keep speaking to each other. And a big part of it are these conferences.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add actually with regards to that is going back to the model of what block producers actually are. You typically therefore have had to see a diversification out in terms of the makeup of these block producers too. So very often some of them would have started out being quite regionally focused, but the reality is now that they're all global organizations servicing a global network as well, and that comes very much back down to what Yves was saying about communication as well.
I just think Yves sold himself short there because he's actually taken it upon himself to embark on a project that is literally dedicated to bridging the language gap, especially between the Chinese and Western and English-speaking communities. And in the EOS conference that took place yesterday, one of the top block producers that operates out of Japan, their team has actually adjusted their sleep schedule to be awake during English speaking hours, and I myself and many of the people on stage have hired representatives in China to be able to understand what's going on in the community over there. So it is a real effort that many are making to be cognizant of the cultural differences and language barriers, and even just when we're awake and asleep, to make sure that this network is running as smoothly as possible.
So, David, you talked about VC and investment. Where do you see EOS in 1 year in relation to businesses and institutions?
So, Block One have issued out $1 billion to a series of EOS VC funds globally. And there was certainly an expectation, I think, back in around about January to March when those announcements first came about, that we were going to start seeing an initial flood of investments out, and a certain disappointment, I think, from a number in the community that come June, where are these initial investments and why are they not? The reality was, of course, that the network itself was stabilizing, and it needs some time for that. And the underlying projects as well, it's very hard to actually carry out effective due diligence from an investment perspective on projects which don't have much by way of things like a code base. So that is starting to reach fruition now, and we're seeing a series of announcements coming through from the likes of Galaxy Digital. They've made now in the last few weeks up to $50 million worth of investments out. I happen to know that a London-based fund as well has got at least 2 investments in their pipeline they're about ready to announce as well. And I'm sure there's a lot more coming from the Asian funds as well. Aside from that, as I mentioned, the block producers themselves, while we are smaller at this stage in terms of what we're capable of doing, we have a lot of technical expertise as well in-house. And that's a huge, huge thing for a community that's looking to actually build on EOS. And that's gradually something that combined with relatively important early seed capital, you're going to see more and more gradually focusing and going into investments, as well as, I think, block producers themselves launching commercial projects. So if I was to look ahead at, say, the next 12 months and see where I think we're going to be in terms of investment with EOS, it's probably the chain right now, despite this crypto winter, that has actually got the most capacity to expand regardless, because it has investment capital in there, and we're going to see that, I think, in the months ahead.
To add to that, I guess, so it's interesting that you say 12 months and that we've been in a bear market effectively for like 10 months right now. But that's actually really, really good for EOS. It might be controversial, but the great thing about this right now is that it enables people to work on foundations. So we have really, really solid foundations, and we're able to continue building. And there's a lot of funds, specifically funds that are putting capital into ideas and projects, and we're significant funds. We're talking about really, really significant funds and significant teams that are developing projects on EOS. And because we're not in a bull market, they're not necessarily competing against time to try and come out with the idea before somebody else does. And so everybody's got their head down, and then it gives them the possibility of then of releasing when they're actually ready. And so I think you kind of sold it short that there's a lot of work that's being done. And just today, I think Activision with Mike Novogratz just announced another, might be wrong in the number, but 16 million, yeah, for some games on EOS. And we're already seeing that the game market on EOS is thriving right now in terms of transactions or in terms of usability. The great thing is that we're seeing that users want to use the blockchain. There's so many games out there that are being in something simple. I saw earlier as well, like the pixel, drawing pixels on a blockchain. We had somebody who did a Pixel Master game, and basically you just effectively draw some pixels and cost some funds. But people want to use the blockchain, and people are effectively really using the blockchain. We're seeing more and more of that.
So it takes me into one of my last questions. If anyone here wants to look into EOS, it's a big world. So where do they begin?
So this is both a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is that you could look in a number of different directions, and they would be good to start with. The bad thing is that you probably have to look in a number of different directions to get the full picture, because it's an incredibly distributed, decentralized community. I think it depends on who you are. If you want to be a token holder and you want to interact and engage with these dApps, that's one thing. If you want to be a developer, that's another. I think that the best place to start would be to take a look at the block producers and say, that one speaks my language, and then reach out, because part of being accountable means that we are very accessible, and we want to help, and we know things. So we are there to answer questions around the clock. So that's how I would start.
Yeah, I think for anybody looking to get involved in a community, any kind of blockchain community, really, when you look at EOS itself, it reflects the full spectrum and diversity of human beings on it. So there are people who are not remotely technical at all, who are playing major roles in the community, and it can be anything from design and marketing to media to thought leadership and philosophy and governance. You name it. That's also out there as well. So to some extent, I would say the challenge for people is to work out what they have a real passion for. And that's the most important thing of all, because once you actually start to get involved, the way I started getting involved is I went to a number of blockchain meetups and conferences like this sort of thing. And I got inspired by the potential for a chain that could actually deliver on a lot of the promise of Ethereum. So that was what led me to follow down and start to get involved with the community. And I started attending more meetups, connected in, started to form a network. And actually, I was looking to build an application and a team and a project. That led me gradually down a path. And I think really for most people that I've seen who are not even in the block producer space themselves, they've often done that. So they've started off appearing on some local groups. They've maybe attended a meetup or two, you know, a couple of them have now become governance experts as well. And I think it's really going to be for people to find that passion that they want to follow in a particular area, and the opportunities will be there.
To summarize it a little bit, it's like EOS is a very big ecosystem, and just think about it as if it's a big human, and there's room for eyes, ears, a mouth, arms, fingers, legs, toes, whatever it is. Find whatever speaks to you, and then there's room for it in the ecosystem. And we already see that is being distributed, and we see more and more people come about and provide value in their own way, and there's room for it because it's such a big ecosystem.
I think one of the end goals here, though, is if you're thinking about retail or enterprise level of adoption, and someone has to first start with a passion for blockchain, that doesn't really work right for everybody. I think the end goal of what EOS is trying to achieve for these easy to use decentralized applications is that when we have become successful is when you are first attracted to the value proposition of a certain application, only later to learn that it runs on EOS. I think that's where we're trying to go.
I think that's a good note to finish on. Thank you for your time, guys. Thank you.